Hey, if you're watching this, we are on week 5 of our Story of the Book series. And if you have made it this far, kudos to you. We've gone through a ton of biblical history. We have talked about how the Bible came to be, and we have talked about how it's the most reliable historical document of all time. And so if you've made it this far, my hope is that you are leaning in to the legitimacy of Scripture. We started this series off by talking about the purpose of why we're doing this series in the first place, is that we want to help you believe the stories in the Bible. And in order to do that, we wanted to tell you the story of the Bible. So over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about its history, how it got put together, that God orchestrated that purpose, that people met about how and what books would go into the Bible. We talked about how it was written down, translation, transmission, a ton of stuff, and hopefully you've been with us through all of that. And if you have, but even if you haven't, today I want to kind of change how we talk about the Bible, and I want to talk about its relevancy. So let's say you're leaning in. Let's say you go, okay, the Bible is a historical document. It does seem to be put together and be thought of in a way that is well thought of and well put together because God orchestrated it and people enacted His will. So what do you do about its content? What do you do about the claims that it makes within itself? So I want to talk about 4 different ways of talking about the relevancy of the Bible. In fact, you've probably asked this question. All cultures, all religions, and all people ask some form of the 4 following questions or 4 subjects that we're going to talk about a little bit today. The first one is, how did I get here? And this is the question of origin. How did you come to be? And what I don't mean is how did your parents make you? That is a conversation for you and your parents. It's probably going to get a little gross, but maybe you want to do that. That's fine. That's up to you. I don't mean biologically. What I mean is, how did we all get here? How did human beings, how did the earth, how did animals and plants, how did the solar system, the space, the sun, the stars, and all things get here? If you think about it long enough, most people will start with themselves and then they'll look out into space and say, how did all of this come to be? It's beautiful, it's majestic. We enjoy not only the trees in front of us, but the stars that have been dead for a long time, that their light is still coming towards us. We are totally enamored with it all. So the first question that almost everyone will deal with, and every religion deals with, and every culture deals with, is the origin of humanity and the origin of people. How did you get here? And that's one of the reasons the Bible is still relevant, is that when you read Scripture, it gives us our origin story. It says, along with science, I might add, that God was here and nothing else existed. And science may not agree with that part, but it agrees with the second one, that there was an explosion of life and everything started to exist. Space expanded, stars were cast out, and God gave them their names. And then the earth was formed, and life began to propagate it. And so the first origin of all human life is what we're curious about. Now, we're probably curious about how you and I got here, but we want to know, how did things come to be? And Scripture in Genesis 1 and 2 and 3 talks about the origin of all things, that God made people in His image. And this is such a pivotal thing that sends us out on our trajectory for the next 3 questions. Think about it this way. If you've ever created anything, when you were a kid, you created a painting, or you made something like an invention, or you put something together and you went to your parents and you said, look what I have made. You are the authority over that thing. You get to say what its purpose is. You get to say why it exists. You can tell people how you made it. And that's a childlike way of thinking about creation, we should look at creation in a childlike manner. Is that God made us His kids to be His image bearers to the world. He could have made us look like anything, and He chose to make us in His image, to reflect His image to one another so that we may worship God and so that all things would look at humankind and see their Creator. And then He gave us this ability to have dominion over the earth, all the plants and all the fish and all of everything that is in creation. God actually gave that to us as part of our origin story. So the second question, if the first one is how did I get here? What is my origin story? The second question is, what's my purpose? What is my meaning in life? And everyone wants to know that they were created for a purpose. Just like the kid who has invented something or painted a picture, they had a reason for doing that thing and telling everybody about it. Look what I have drawn, look what I have created. Your purpose is to worship and honor God and to reflect His image throughout the entirety of the world for as long as you can. Even Genesis talked about this purpose, that God made us in His image, again, to reflect Him to one another and to everyone else. And everyone wants to know that their life has meaning. In fact, it's one of the things that as we age, we begin to question, has my life already had meaning? Have I made an impact on the people I care about? Have I made an impact on this world? Will anybody remember me, my deeds, my name? All of us want to have meaningful lives. We do not just want to exist and to fade away. And God has given us that meaning, to love Him, to love ourselves, and to love others. And so that is our meaning in life, to reflect His image and His glory through worship and through our actions and through our thoughts. Now, the third question is kind of an interesting one. How should I behave? How should I live morally? So where did I come from? What is the meaning of my life? And then the third one is, how should I behave? How do I function within society, within my family? How do I function by myself and outside of the walls of my house? What is the behavior that is expected of me? And we need an answer to this question, because otherwise, if it's subjective, if everyone gets to ask the question, what does morality look like to me, then we'll all have different answers. You know, there are some cultures in the world who think things like rape and murder and stealing and lying are not things that are immoral. Are they right? Are we right? Is it just the product of a civilized society? And now that one's probably easy to answer because we still have those things in a civilized society. The morality factor of how we behave, and not only towards other people, but to ourselves. How do we treat our bodies? How do we love God with everything that we have? How do we treat ourselves and love ourselves first? How do we behave? Scripture gives us that too. In fact, Jesus and the apostles would talk about this a lot, that there are a lot of things we should not do because it does not honor the way that God has made us, and it does not honor other people, and it does not bear God's image to the world. Things like lying and cheating, things like sexual immorality, things like defaming God's name or treating someone harshly, murder, or even talking about someone in a poor way does not honor the image that God has made us in. And then also, how do we behave in a positive way? To tell the truth with grace, to give people a help when they need it, to be generous, to be loving, to be kind, to show radical generosity and care when people do not deserve it. The third one, how should we behave? Not just morally when people are watching, but graciously when people aren't. God gives us that standard in His Scripture. And then the fourth one is the thing that maybe people only think about when they're near it, but we need to think about far more often and far more early than we think. Where am I going? What is my ultimate destiny? How did I get here? What's the meaning of my life? How should I behave? And where am I going? And this one is one of the major pieces of Scripture, that everyone has a destination. Not necessarily by default, or I guess by default. Not everyone is going to be with God forever. And this is part of the reason we do ministry. It's part of the reason that Scripture is so pivotal, that it tells people that you are destined for a place it's not going to be good and you're not going to like unless you give your life to Christ. And it's part of the passion of what we do here at LifePoint Church, both through volunteers and pastors and messages and care and everything else. Ultimately, we want people to live with God forever. So your ultimate destiny, the reason the Bible is relevant is because it gives us our origin story. It tells us what the meaning of our life is. It tells us how to behave, and also it tells us where ultimately we're going. And all of this is going to be summed up in a couple weeks as I talk about what the Bible is about. But for now, these are the four major questions that make Scripture relevant. If you're looking at discussing these in your small groups, or maybe you're going to talk about these on a Sunday, maybe you figure out how you would answer these four things. Where did I come from? What's the meaning of my life? How should I behave? And where am I going? Thank you so much for joining us for week 5.